Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. Let me check my sound, make sure I am up. I'm wide awake, can't sleep. And being wide awake and not sleeping, I do what most people do when they're wide awake and can't sleep. I do the news. I do the news. So I am on Twitter, checking my emails, checking my DMs. Oh, by the way, Tim Canova is going to be on the show next week. Yes, whoa, whoa. So that should be a damn good show. We're going to talk about the election integrity, going to Florida, and him switching over to an independent. I am immensely looking forward to that. That's going to be amazing. And Lee Carter is going to be here tomorrow at 4 p.m. He was nice enough to come back on the show after my technical difficulties. Those technical difficulties, that's one of those yada yada things. That's me throwing away the power cord during the moving process. He was nice enough to come back on the show. So that's going to take place tomorrow at 4 p.m. So that's going to be great. I'm perusing Twitter, and I see this advertisement that pops up that says there's an article on the Hill, and it says fake news had an impact on the election. And I said, BS. That was my first thought. But I said, well, wait a minute. You work in the capacity of a show now, which means you have to be somewhat fair to the information that you take in. You can't necessarily be this thing of, yes, it's your show, you have a perspective. You're a person. You're just a person. By the same token, you have to take on another skill. Meaning, you have to be willing to take in that particular additional information. So fair enough. I disbelieve this, but convince me. Make me a believer. So I open it and I read through it, and it says fake news may have an impact, etc., etc. And then I see words like may, possibly. We can't know for sure, but we have a conclusion. And then I say, okay, well, what was the testing methodology? How did you do this? Like, how did you come to these conclusions that you guys have? You're calling it a study. You're making it sound scientific. When people say study, they try to come to this. We're talking about science. Science is the high priest of our times. So when people want to kind of justify or explain or convince, they use science to do so. It's a study. You had people who were hard-nosed and skeptical, and they had on their coats, and they looked at these things, and they came to a conclusion. They were iron-jawed, and they didn't necessarily let feelings and emotion cloud their opinion in regards to the conclusions that they take. I looked at this study. It's nonsense. I'm sorry, guys. It's nonsense. I don't know whether the people who were doing this study was incompetent. I don't know if these guys were corrupt. But the study is nonsense. There are easily more perfect explanations for the phenomena that they are describing in this study. And the answer to this is not to jump the shark to say, we found it! We've justified all of the abuse, all of the stuff that Hillary Clinton has been taking on. She really didn't lose because she was a horrible candidate. It was indeed fake news. It was indeed fake news. What happened? She was right. It was fake news. It wasn't her. It wasn't she was a horrible candidate. It was something else. It was fake news. It had a substantial impact. What they're talking about as a substantial impact is this correlation test. Are people who dislike Hillary Clinton, or are people who may have read something that the people on the test considered to be fake news? And understand what I mean by considered, because I even challenge the questions that they're asking that they're considered to be fake news. But is there a correlation between the people who answered these questions that we provided versus the people who did not vote for Hillary Clinton after voting for Obama? That's the test. There's another perfect. And I'm going to read through this first because I want you to read it. And I'm going to put it at the bottom so you can read it for yourself. Now, I was somewhat skeptical of going into this because I also had a test. When I first started this, when all of this first started with the channel, I came across, I think there were more than one, but at least one, Stanford. Stanford did a test on the election. This. Stanford examines fake news and the 2016 presidential election. Fabricated stories favoring Donald Trump were shared a total of 30 million times, nearly quadruple the number of pro-Hillary shares leading up to the election, according to Stanford economist Matthew Ginswaus. Even so, he and his co-author find that the most widely circulated hoaxes were seen by only a small fraction of Americans. Just to put a button on what they found, because you can read the article for yourself. What it boils down to is, yes, there was fake news, but there's always been fake news. And all of that fake news had to overwhelm Hillary Clinton with $1 billion. All of these newspapers saying, vote Hillary Clinton. All of these people, their family, friends, their culture, the people around them and everything else, newsmen, all these people, all of these things, $1 billion campaign. It had to overwhelm all of these things in order to sway these people in a particular direction. The fact is, it didn't. That was essentially a nutshell of their analysis. Now, so Ohio State comes back and says, well, those guys from Stanford has a thumb in their ass, and those guys are wrong. Okay. Explain to me how they're wrong. A team of researchers from Ohio State concluded in a new study that fake news stories had a significant impact on voters in 2016 presidential election that may have impacted the final result. The study, first reported by the Washington Post on Tuesday, sought to measure the degree to which false news stories dissuaded voters to cast ballots for President Obama in 2016 from voting the Democratic presidential nominee Hillary Clinton. To measure the degree to which false news stories dissuaded voters who cast ballots. All right, remember this. This is what they're trying to measure. I want to know the unit of that measure. I'm skeptical that they can do this, but let's see how they come to the measurement of this, because that's important. While the researchers emphasize that they could not definitively say that fake news caused Obama voters to defect from Hillary Clinton, well, but you've just told me that you concluded that it had a significant impact on the result. Which one is it? Which one is it? You can't say, but you can conclude. Look, yes, I'm skeptical of the study. The study seems ridiculous. I understand what they're trying to figure out. I get it. And yes, I'm somewhat skeptical that they can figure this out. But you've just told me, you've emphasized that you cannot definitively say that fake news caused Obama voters to defect from Hillary Clinton. Okay, if you can't definitively say that, how are you concluding anything? How? What trick of the word are you using to allow you to say I can conclude one thing, but I emphasize that I can't come to a conclusion about it in this other capacity? Okay, fair enough. Let's be fair. Let's hear them out. Let's hear them out. While the researchers emphasized that they could not definitively say that fake news caused Obama voters to defect from Hillary Clinton in 2016, they nevertheless concluded, I can't definitively say, but yet I have a conclusion. Come on, please tell me I'm not the only one who thinks that sounds bizarre. All right. That these slips had a substantial impact that it may have been sufficient enough to swing the election to Donald Trump. Again, we have may. We have emphasized that we can't do this, but God damn it, we can make a conclusion on stuff that we don't know. Our analysis leads us to the conclusion that fake news most likely did have a substantial impact on the voting decisions of strategically important voting sets, those who voted for Barack Obama in 2012. All right. Now, I want to see, okay, explain to me how you do this. Like, how are you measuring that? I understand you come to a conclusion. And to be fair to the researchers, quote unquote researchers, to be fair to the people doing whatever they're doing, they did emphasize, we cannot say that this is true, even though they're concluding something. I find that to be the most bizarre circumstances. Like, the idea that you put that in one paragraph seems so weird to me. They seem to just run contrary to one another. How are you concluding anything when you can't definitively say something, or you can't make a statement? All right, but let's keep going. broader campaign to influence the 2016 election, Russia used social media trolls and state-run outlets to peddle fake news stories. Special counsel Robert Mueller has indicted 13 Russians over the stories, alleging elaborate plot to use social media to spread divisive political and cultural content. Now, what's wild and strange about this is that they looked for Russian collusion, couldn't find any. What they found were Russian trolls. Now, the other media says, look, in order for this to have any effect, it would have had to overwhelm all of these other things that have been screaming that you should vote for Hillary Clinton. $1 billion campaign versus a few $1,000s in Russian trolls. The majority of the ads taking place after the election. And just so happen you have a study that comes out and says, hey, we found evidence. We found evidence, in quotes. Find is the right word. We found evidence that Russian trolls or that fake news had an impact on the election. That's what we found. We've just so happened to find it. We ourselves have found it. We've found the evidence for you. And then you start saying, well, wait a minute. How did you find this? What was your methodology? Well, just to put in a caveat, we can't confirm or definitively say any of this stuff. And everything that we say has to be qualified with the idea of may or may not. But we are going to conclude something. And we're going to call it a study, goddammit. We're Ohio State University. I'm sorry, that's embarrassing. Those words should not go together. Let's keep going. Trump and members of the administration have insisted that Russia's efforts did not have an impact on the outcome. Not just Trump, Stanford. Meanwhile, Clinton has blamed Russia in part for her loss. Facebook and Twitter ads! How incompetent can you be? How incompetent? Explain to me your incompetence. If you lost to a reality show host, hey, he was a reality show host. Let that sink in. Who had no political experience. Who didn't even have a ground game and know what a ground game was when he first opened his campaign. You lost to that guy. And your retort here, your fallback stance is, look, I know I had over $1 billion to run this campaign. I know I had all of these media networks on my side for this. I know I had a bunch of Republicans even backing me in this particular campaign. I know I had all of this. The entire edifice of media and the political establishment tilted in my honor. All of these people bowed, and I say, bend the goddamn knee. And I told the American public, you will be fortunate to have me. You're with me. And she lost. And your fallback position is, even though I had all of these things, all of these advantages, a bunch of Russian trolls, Facebook and Twitter ads, half of which, more than half, took place after the election, was able to topple all of these things. This is a laughable disposition. I'm sorry, this is a laughable disposition. And honestly, even if what you're saying is true, your incompetence means that you shouldn't be able to get the presidency anyway. Somebody that incompetent should not be at the helm of the presidency, let alone winning a political campaign. She lost on her own merits. I don't know what Hillbots are in Ohio State. I understand that you may think you're doing a scientific study, but I would guarantee you that your emotions about this are guiding the information that is coming out of whatever you guys are considering to be a study. This study is nonsense. Let's actually take a look at the nuts and bolts of the study, because I keep saying it's nonsense, but I want you to understand why I'm saying it's nonsense. In order to quantify the impact of fake news on the election, Ohio University researchers, quote-unquote, Richard Gunford, Paul A. Beckert, and Eric Nisbet, putting quotes on all of their names, conducted a YouGov survey in 2016 and early 2017 of 585 voters who supported Obama in 2012 out of a sample of 1,600. 10% of those voters cast ballots for Trump, 4% supported minority parties, and 8% declined to vote. The researchers sought to determine what accounted for the defections from Clinton. They weren't defections from Clinton. She never owned anybody. Understand what I am saying. Even right there, the premise is wrong. The premise is somewhat propaganda. She never owned anybody. There weren't defections from Hillary Clinton because Hillary Clinton never owned her. She doesn't own those votes. The Democratic Party does not own those votes. If you're asking why this person voted for Obama in one part and didn't vote for Hillary Clinton in another part, that's a different question. But she never owned the votes. It's very possible that those people go back and forth in the upcoming elections. I've interacted with people who said Obama didn't do it for me. He said it was a hope and change. It wasn't hope and change. I'm moving over to Donald Trump. That took place. That had nothing to do with any of this. That person would have been an Obama voter, and then that person turned around and voted for Donald Trump. How would that person show in your poll? Would that person show in your poll as somebody who was influenced in some way? And if so, the results of your poll on that would be wrong. I'm making a point that you guys are jumping to conclusions about why and people motivations based on a few questions. Your premises are wrong. The entire premise of this is wrong. Let's keep going. There's more. Specifically, they asked voters 281 questions that included fake news statements, 2 of which were negative statements about Clinton and 1 positive about Trump, and all of which were propagated by traditional and social media. The researchers, for instance, asked voters if they believed the statement Hillary Clinton is in poor health due to serious illness. The researchers found, and again, the premise of that question is wrong. Like, I don't know if Hillary Clinton is in poor health. The only answer to that question is what I just said. I don't know. If the researcher is looking for an answer of yes, or if the researcher is looking for an answer of no, the researcher is wrong. Because I guarantee you that the researcher also doesn't know. The premise of the stuff is to some degree wrong. If the researcher is trying to make the point that, well, if they saw something with Hillary Clinton falling down, and people got the impression that Hillary Clinton was in poor health because they saw Hillary Clinton fall down, then that person would have believed fake news. How is it fake news if Hillary Clinton was in poor health and the person looked at this and says, the woman fell, maybe she's in poor health. Maybe she is. Now, the fact is, the person who's writing this question doesn't know the answer to that question himself. He's making an assumption about the world that she is in perfect health. The answer to this question, the only answer to this question, is I don't know. It is not wrong for the person who say, looks like she fell, maybe she's in poor health. And he is no more wrong than the person who says Hillary Clinton is in perfect health is right. The premise of this test is off. That's all I'm saying. They're putting this out there like this thing is a study. This thing is not a study in the traditional sense of a hard-nosed study. They've already said they can't tell you anything definitively. And yet they've come to conclusions. I find that to be amazing. And it's just so happened the conclusions fit the narrative that has been populated by the Democratic Party. That's awesome. That's awesome. That's not fishy at all. Let's keep going. 89%, let's say it this way, specifically, and a much larger percentage of those Obama voters who did not believe any of the fake news statements voted for Hillary Clinton, 89%. Then those who believed one of the statements, 61%, and those who believed 2 of them, 17%. The study also took into account other factors that could have swayed Obama voters to casting ballots for Clinton, including age, race, political identification, and gender. Using what is called multivariate regression analysis, let's use a scientific term, they found that the belief in fake news still accounted for a significant portion of defections when factors were considered, including the extent to which voters disliked Clinton or liked Trump. Former Obama voters who believed 1 or 2 of the more fake news stories 3 times more likely were to defect from the Democratic ticket in 2016 than those who believed any of the false claims after taking into account all those other factors the researchers wrote. The study emphasized that they cannot conclude from the survey that fake news caused Obama voters to defect from Clinton in 2016. It notes that it's possible voters first decided not to vote for Clinton and then incited false stories in order to rationalize their vote. Right there. Right there. All of this is explained by that little blurb. In fact, they shouldn't have come to a conclusion in this because all of it is explained by that little blurb. How on earth are you coming to a conclusion when you just said you can't really say anything conclusively? All of this. It's most likely that people had somewhat of a cognitive bias. Even if you want to say that these stories are fake news and these stories are legitimate, I understand what you're getting at. Even if you want to say that, for all intents and purposes, it is much more likely that these people came to a particular disposition and then had a cognitive bias on the information that was presented to them. Meaning, I dislike Hillary Clinton. I dislike Obama. This did not turn out the way I thought it was going to turn out. My life is harder than what my life was before. These guys cheated my particular candidate. And then the information that came up, oh, yeah, right, that. I believe that now. That's on my wavelength because that person is an asshole. I believe that now. That much more likely explains what they're saying. The fact that you're calling this a study when that explosive part explains all of this. Don't call it a study. Don't call it a study. Or at the very least, if you call this a study, you could just as well use this portion to explain the entirety of it and call that a study. You have not found anything that cannot be explained away by the simple thing that you've just put into the point to explain it. I said that poorly. I'm just making a point that calling this a study gives a wrong connotation when everything that's in the study can be explained away by something that they put as somewhat of a side note. They put it as a side note. I found this, I read this, and I thought this is absurd. This is absolutely absurd. Stanford study makes far more sense to me. Stanford, and again, I'm putting both in a thing. You can read them for yourself. It makes far more sense to me that it is the fake news narratives that were put out were narratives that were already put out by the Trump campaign. Russia put out nothing different than anybody else put out. So it's not like these things came out and these things deviated people's thinking in this process. Also, let's not pretend that fake news is not something that is always out. The only difference in this is they coined the term fake news. The study is bogus. The study is bogus. I'll put both down so you can read both for yourself. I saw this and I was like, okay, let's read it. And as I read through it, I was like, this is absurd. Before I even got to that part, I said to myself, no, people have cognitive bias. Those people already have taken a disposition, and now the information itself is becoming more apparent to them. They're on the wavelength. It is difficult to pull somebody off a particular wavelength once they've made a decision on those things. Those people had an opinion already. The fake news just helped with that opinion. They just gave them ammunition they hit somebody over the head with. But the ammunition was there. So, Gardner, people don't understand the difference between peer-reviewed material and some semester project by a sophomore. Yeah, I read this like, this is absurd. This is absurd. Like, the Hill should not be putting this out as a study. This is not a study in the traditional sense of a study. This is not. I can rip this apart. Like, I am not even one of those people who are hard-nosed looking at this and peeling apart. But it's so overt and over the top. Not a study. That it should not be put forward as if it was. That's how bad it is. That's how bad it is. That's absolutely how bad it is. So, yeah. First, you have to clearly define what fake news is. Chuck Brock. Not just clearly define what fake news is, Brock. You also have to, if you're doing a study, look, if you're doing some kind of study, you're trying your best to delineate things. Meaning from us, the way we look at this kind of mechanistic universe, the way we look at our world. Scientists piece these things apart. It's like an atom. You have this singular unit, and how do I separate this from that? I am the observer looking at this thing that I'm observing. You're breaking these things apart, and you're trying to understand the way these things work, the interaction between these things. In this case, they're trying to say whether fake news had an impact. Fair enough. Like you said first, what's fake news? What's untrue? What does that mean? What does fake news mean in this context? I know people think they know what it means, but we're talking about a study. We're trying to actually quantify each of these things. What does fake news mean? How do you determine whether an individual decided not to do something based on fake news? That's the second point. And you need to clearly define that in a way that clearly delineates that from the other factors. That's your study. That's what you need to figure out. Which is when I looked at that and I said, okay, how are you going to do that? That's what I meant by that. How do you delineate, I did not vote for this person because of fake news that I saw. I saw this and this and I decided I'm not voting for that person. That's what you need to figure out. The study doesn't do that. The study doesn't even get close to that. The people in this study in this kind of shameful way even admit, we can't say that this is the case, then why are you coming to a conclusion? Like, this is laughable. That's all. I just mean this is absolutely laughable. Like, and this is going to be ammunition from some random hillbot that says, see, we told you. You laughed at her when she screamed. What happened? You laughed at her. You laughed at her. When she fell down the hill in India, you laughed. And now we have a study. We're holding a fucking study for 3 people in Ohio. No, it's not peer reviewed. Yes, they wrote it on a napkin, but it's a study nonetheless. I don't care if it's in crayon. And we're going to use this study to go around the world explaining that Hillary Clinton didn't fail on her own merit. She failed because of fake news. $50,000 in Facebook ads. Bastard Russians. Those bastards. Peter Dow lives in a constant state of fake news. Peter Dow does live in a constant state of fake news, Balthazar. Robert Pouquet Ray. Christian Mingle tried to hack my jockstrap, but they didn't succeed. Fucking A, Robert Pouquet Ray. Keep him out your jockstrap. Winkle Bernie Bro. Hillary used this herself, just like she and Podesta pushed the 17 agencies lie. That's exactly what's... Look, fake news is always used. It's information warfare. They just named it. Naming it does not bring it into existence. I'm sorry to tell you. Fake news has always been around. It's always been around. I get it. That was my point. You can't even determine the variable. You're trying to prove influence in the study, let alone determine that variable caused the vote to change. Yes, right. Did it actually get people off their wavelength? I loved Obama. And then I saw this fake news and was like, oh, I don't like Obama. I don't like Obama. So, the study's nonsense. The study's nonsense. Unfortunately, the fact that the study is nonsense does not mean that they have a headline, because people don't read most beyond the headline. And they're going to say, I found it. We found a study that justifies our warped view of the world. The fake news toppled $1 billion. That's what we found. CTR is literally in the business of falsifying news. Oh, that's so sad. That's so sad. Skip Rock. What was the bigger mistake? Not campaigning in Wisconsin or having a seizure at 9/11 Memorial? I don't know, man. I don't know, Skip. I'm going to say skipping Wisconsin. I would say skipping Wisconsin. I don't know if it would have mattered, to be honest. I know people give her shit about skipping Wisconsin. But the issue with Wisconsin, if I'm not mistaken, was NAFTA. I could be wrong, but NAFTA in Ohio. I thought it was NAFTA. Or Wisconsin, Ohio. I thought it was NAFTA. Seizure didn't help. Seizure didn't help. Alright, guys. I'm not going to keep this one long. I saw this and was like, what the hell? I need to do a video. That's where it was. I was wide awake, so I said, let's do it. So, I'm going to end this. Alright, guys. If you enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you can always support the Patreon. Thanks, everyone.